dia, alunos. Bem-vindos a mais um módulo internacional, um vídeo muito especial hoje para falar com nossa convidada, Alexis Wichowski, que é professora da Escola de Assuntos Internacionais e Públicos da Universidade de Colômbia, nos Estados Unidos. Ela também chefia o Departamento de Tecnologia e Inovação na Prefeitura de Nova York, além de possuir PhD em Tecnologia, Mídia e Comunicação, e autora de diversos livros e artigos sobre os temas da expertise dela, que são Tecnologia, Mídia e Comunicação. Como um dos livros principais seria O Comércio da Informação, e o artigo Hackear a Burocracia, um guia para fazer as coisas acontecerem no governo. A fala de hoje vai ser sobre tendências, desafios e oportunidades da transformação digital para municípios no pós-Covid. É um prazer tê-la aqui conosco e agora eu vou passar para o inglês. Alexis, it's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to start with a presentation and then we'll go on with a few questions.
Great, so I'm going to share my screen.
Please.
Can you see my screen? Yes? Great. So today we're going to be talking about trends, challenges, and opportunities for digital transformation in municipalities. And there's three things we want to talk about. Layers and phases, this will make sense soon. The methodologies of Agile and Waterfall, which will also make sense soon, and then how these apply to government. So we think about how we make change, and it's useful to think about architecture in this way. We don't change everything all at once in government. When you want to embark on transformation of any kind, especially digital transformation, we need to think about the layers of change that we're trying to affect. So if you think of a house, there's the foundation, but then there's also all of the other layers, the walls, the furniture, etc. So if you want to make a foundational change, you have to go through the outer layers first. And I think of it kind of like this. We all want to start working and immediately see change happen, but that's not how it works. We have to go through several steps first of activities, building alliances and partnerships, instituting processes, and creating products before we actually make change happen and make digital transformation real. And so another way to think of this is by working in phases. There's a wonderful description of emotional stages of change that I think really apply to also digital transformation in government. So we have this sort of idea of there being a half optimism and half pessimism kind of perspective. And we start out with any change. We're not very informed because we don't know much about it yet, but feeling optimistic, we feel hopeful. Once we start learning how hard it will be to make change happen, it starts to make us feel a little bit overwhelmed or pessimistic about being able to do anything really substantive. And then we hit what they call the valley of despair, where we feel like there's really no point in going forward. But if we push through that, we are now informed about what it will take to make digital transformation possible, but feeling hopeful again, and then we see real change happen. So the problem is most people quit right around here. They get to the stage where they feel this valley of despair, and then they have to go through the whole process of starting something else again. So the question is, how do we change this in government? Well, we think about the phases of government work. The first thing we do in any kind of transformation is we connect to other people, whether they're people in our own government, whether they're citizens, we have to make connections and form partnerships. Government can't do anything by itself. It has to make sure it's working with the community. When we start to implement processes, this can be very difficult. This is sort of where we have to make the ideas turn into reality, and it can feel very difficult indeed. And we hit the same valley of despair that we see in emotional change. But once we see the outcome of our work, see people's lives actually changed by the change we're trying to introduce, we feel hopeful again and we can see real change happen. Problem is also in government, we spend a lot of time in this stage where we work to connect and form partnerships, implement processes, and we never really see the outcome of what we do. So how do we conquer the valley of despair? The first thing we have to do is make sure that we see quick wins, that there are tangible pieces of evidence that the work that we're doing is actually making a difference. We share the outcome of our work and get feedback, and then we update the processes accordingly to make sure that we're doing things successfully. This is actually very similar to the way we approach designing software with these two technologies or methodologies, Agile and Waterfall. And just to very briefly describe that, when you use an Agile process, you start with analyzing the problem and making a plan, but then you enter this cycle where you design, build, test, design, build, test. You go through it again and again to make sure that you're getting it right before you deploy the solution. And if you need different requirements because they change over time, you just do the whole process again. So it's a very flexible way of working. It's a very flexible way of trying out new things in government. So it's not just for software. This is a way of thinking. It's a kind of culture change. The way government usually works is what we call the waterfall process, where you analyze first, make a plan, institute some designs, spend a long time building the solution before you test and deploy. But the problem is requirements always change, circumstances always change, and there's not really a great way to introduce changes in this kind of way of working. So the way that we can introduce Agile methodologies into government is through this triangle that we see in the middle, where we are iterative, we go through quick tests to make sure that we can make changes, we update processes incrementally, and we're interactive. We don't hide our work and wait till the end for a big reveal. We introduce our ideas, socialize our ideas and our products and outcomes along the way. Because the problem is if we use the waterfall approach, we can get stuck in these first few phases where we're spending a lot of time uninformed or working in this consecutive fashion where we get stuck in a valley of despair and we don't get to see the outcome of our work until it's all over at the end. So the way that we think about this in government, back to our original graphic here, is that we want to spend a lot of time in this center part of the process, building alliances, thinking about what processes make sense and what the outcome will be, what the product will be. And it kind of puts us in the neighborhood of change. It makes us feel closer to the change that we actually want to see. So when you think about digital transformation in government, it's not just about buying new computers or new technology. It's about changing the way you work, changing the way you approach lasting change, and avoiding the valley of despair, because it's not easy to transform anything in life, let alone in government. And now a few quick tips that help you avoid the valley of despair. First is plan projects that fulfill multiple goals at various stages. I wrote an article about this based on a partnership that we did a few months ago with 13 agencies. 13 agencies is a lot to handle, but we had many small goals that we fulfilled at various stages, so everyone felt like we were making progress all along. This one, I also am a big fan of demo, don't memo. What this means is, instead of writing about what you want to do, build something, even if it's just a graphic that shows what something might look like, to show impact early and often. Provide a wedge for lasting change. So when you do find successes, build them into bigger successes. So don't just stop with the small solutions, figure out ways to scale them up. And create feedback loops. We all know that government has a lot of meetings. We have to meet with our partners, we have to meet with citizens, we have to meet with stakeholders, but it's important to do these things because we need their feedback. It's not just about showing people that we are interested in listening to them. We actually have to listen to them. So create those feedback loops to get the input you need. And I want to close with this quote from one of the chief technology officers for President Obama, for digital transformation to work, you have to develop trust with people. It's just change management. It's not complicated, it's just hard. So thank you very much. And I hope that this was useful as you embark on your own digital transformation in government.
Thank you, Alexis. It was great. Change management is difficult in general, and in government is a great big adventure. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit now. My first question would be to bring us to the current context of COVID crisis. The crisis has brought some irreversible changes, yes, when we talk about technology. And I would like to know what are the main challenges and opportunities for public administration's digital transformation considering this new context?
It's a great question. And I think that one of the great opportunities we have right now is that everyone in government and everyone in society is focused on one thing, the pandemic. It's very rare for there to be a unifying concern. There's so many things to worry about in society, from homelessness to education problems to healthcare. But right now, everyone's focused on one thing. So we can harness that focus and really make change happen by collaborating on solutions that address aspects of the pandemic. One of the ways that we did this in New York City was to work with public-private partnerships, where we got donations from the private sector for medical equipment specifically, and food services for people who were losing their jobs and needed food. And so we were able to get everybody's energy, the public sector, the private sector, all working in collaboration together. So I think that's one of the opportunities that we have right now.
Perfect. And we are talking to future municipal leaders in Brazil. What advice would you give to them now that they're planning for the next 4 years term when it comes to technology and innovation? How can they use technology and innovation to improve service delivery and policy development? If you could also give a few, what are the must do and the don'ts?
Happy to. So I think it's a very exciting time to be thinking of entering municipal leadership positions, because there's so much that cities can do to try things out that are harder to do on a federal level. So one of the things I would encourage is to embrace pilot testing. It doesn't all have to be a massive program or a massive launch. Try testing out solutions in small ways through this Agile methodology that I described earlier. You'll be able to show the public results quickly, because when you do a pilot test, it should be something that's maybe a short period of time, a few weeks or a few months. And you'll be able to also learn quickly what works and what doesn't. So you won't waste taxpayer money on big projects that aren't going to succeed. So the second thing I would say is digital transformation is it's much more than the technological tools that we're using. It's a mindset, it's a way of thinking. And it's really important to recognize that most people in government aren't used to it. So it will take time. So the second thing I would advise is patience, to be patient with the people you're working with. Everyone that's in public service wants to help serve people, but not everyone is familiar with all of these new ways of working. So sometimes technology can be a useful, almost a distraction, to get people focused on doing things differently. But what you really want is culture change. You want people to change the way they approach problems and think about solutions. So think about technology and innovation as tools, not ends in themselves. One of the problems we see a lot in government is that people say, we have a problem, we need an app, or we have a problem, we need a hackathon. No, not necessarily. You have a problem, what you need is a solution. And sometimes that solution will involve technology, but sometimes it will not. It will just involve changing a process, changing how you do something. So it's important to try to encourage this sort of changing mindset with the people you work with and to have patience with them. In terms of do's and don'ts, I think I'll start with the don'ts. Don't invest a lot of money up front in a shiny technology solution. sometimes we can look at what other governments have or what the private sector has and say, ah, if we had this tool or this system in our government, it would solve all our problems. It'll only cost us, $10 million. That would be, I think, a mistake, because what works in the private sector doesn't necessarily work in the public sector. We have different requirements. We all want to be efficient, but government also has to be fair in a way that the private sector does not. So we want to make sure that we're designing solutions that reach all our people, not just the people who are easiest to reach. Another don't would be to rush the process. One of the things that we do when we look at designing solutions in government with technology and through innovation practices is along what we call discovery process. We do a lot of questioning, we research, we interview people and find out the people who are actually working to deliver services to citizens, what are their pain points? What are the things that make their job hard? And through that can help design a solution that's really going to make an impact. Sometimes we think of leadership as having the answers, but very often it's the people on the front lines who are actually delivering services to citizens that understand the problem best. So it takes time to interview and get to know the people on the front lines who are delivering services. So that's one of the do's also, is to take that time. Another thing to make sure that we do is to keep an open mind. Innovation is not about finding just, as I said, shiny new tech tools. It's about using resources in new ways. So you might find that there are solutions that are very inexpensive and very effective that are just new applications of something that you already have. I'll give you a very simple example of an innovation that New York City instituted that worked very well. When, after the city shut down all the parks for the COVID pandemic, they wanted to reopen some parks, but also encourage social distancing. So they drew with white chalk circles on the grass in the park, 6 feet apart from each other, to show very simply where you could sit and still be safe enough to be distant from other people. There was no technology involved. There was maybe a ruler involved and chalk. It was a very cheap solution that worked very well. So I think the other thing to think about is that innovation is not necessarily always the obvious solution, but generally it's some sort of application of what you have already. So you can do a lot even with a small budget, which I think a lot of governments are going to be struggling with for a while.
Perfect. Now I'd like to bring a concept that we hear a lot for some time now, the smart cities concept. We have seen a variety of experiences, not all good, from all over the world, here in Brazil also. And I'd like to know, what is your understanding and your vision of this approach? And what advice would you give to municipal leaders trying to build smart cities?
Smart cities are coming, whether we get involved or not in government. The private sector will continue to build tools that allow us to build technology into the physical infrastructures of our environment. So I think it's really important that government doesn't get left behind. We want to make sure that we are integrating smart city technology, but wisely and carefully, and being sure that we are educating the public about what they do. I'll give you an example. We have near all of our bridges in New York City sensors that can count the number of pedestrians, bicycles, and cars. Now, it's very useful to be able to know that information for planning about traffic management, and in case there's an accident or a fire, to know where to direct the fire trucks and ambulances to avoid traffic. But the public doesn't necessarily know when they see these sensors what the data is being used for. They might think that the government is spying on them or something. So it's very important to just label them, make sure that there's public information available about what the sensors are there for and what they're actually capable of. These sensors that count pedestrians, they're not actually capable of capturing someone's facial features. It's really just counts of human bodies. But if you don't tell people that, then they don't know and they worry. So government has a responsibility to make sure that they educate the public about what smart cities technologies are used for, why they're valuable, and what they're capable of, so that there's not misunderstandings and a backlash from fear-based.
Perfect. So we are seeing in Brazil, we have seen for quite some time now, a great distrust from the population in the government. Comes from corruption scandals, but also from lack of quality in service delivery. And the COVID crisis hasn't helped. Yes, it has added a layer in this distrust. So in your vision, how do you think that city governments could use innovation to get closer to citizens and regain this trust?
I think that trust between citizens and their government is one of the foundations of any healthy society. And we've seen it break down here in the US as well. One of the hardest things to do as a government official is to really listen to citizens, because it's hard. If you ask someone, hey, come to a town hall, and I, as a representative of government, will listen to whatever your concerns are, there will be a lot of angry people who come and just vent about their concerns and problems. But if you hear them and listen to them and let them know, I hear you and I acknowledge your problems as real, then you can move past that and have a real dialogue about moving past the venting about problems to actual brainstorming about solutions. But it requires showing up. Now, a mayor or a government official can't be everywhere and can't meet every citizen. So one of the things that we can do is use technology to create opportunities to listen. Maybe it's a virtual town hall. Maybe it's a platform where citizens can put in their comments. Maybe it's opportunities where mayors and public officials can visit other ongoing events that are being organized by the community, just to show up, just to say, I'm here and I'm listening. There's tremendous value in letting people know that you care about their problems, in earning their trust. And there's no shortcut. There's no way to do it without putting in the time, having a thick skin, being willing to have someone express a lot of anger and be okay with that and say, I'm not going to take it personally. I'm listening and I care. And it's not easy, but it works. We've seen it work in a lot of our community engagement programs here in New York City. And it's, I think, something that mayors have an especially unique position to be able to do because of their position. If somebody listens to you from government, that's nice. If the mayor listens to you, that makes you feel very important. So it's a special responsibility.
Thank you for the message. I'd like to, you mentioned before a little during your presentation about this experience of bringing 13 agencies together to collaborate in the COVID-19 crisis response. Could you share a little bit more about this? Because we hear that collaboration between municipal departments and agencies is essential to a good management, but it's also one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, we have an expression in English that it's like herding cats, trying to get lots of cats all to go in one direction. They don't want to do it. Again, one of the reasons it was possible to get 13 agencies to work together during the COVID crisis was because everyone was focused on the same problem. There was no competing, there was no need to convince anyone this is important or this is serious. Everyone just understood that. But what we needed to do was establish trust. We were asking 13 agencies to share their data so that we could build a dashboard that would integrate all the data and show it in a way that made it useful for decision makers at City Hall. But for agencies to be willing to share their data, you need to actually have a person to talk to who's responsible for that data, who feels confident that you will take good care of it and be careful with it. So you have to build relationships. This is where government is a very human endeavor. It's not about processes, it's not about technology, it's about spending the time to build the relationships. Reaching out to people. One of the ways that we did this with the PPE dashboard was by just calling the agency and saying, we need to talk to whoever's in charge of that data pertaining to, for in this case, medical equipment. And eventually someone would pass us along to the right person. But then when you got to that person, you couldn't just say, hi, I'm Alexis, hand me your data. That doesn't work. You have to have conversation. You have to ask what they're working on. You have to ask about what their concerns are. You have to invest the time. So I would say for every data set, there was probably 1 to 2 hours total of conversations, not emails, conversations that happened to earn their trust. So it took maybe a week to get all 13 agencies' data sets. And of that week, maybe 20 to 40 hours of phone calls. And that's a lot of time to spend on the phone. It's a lot of listening, but trust does not come quickly. You have to earn it, and you have to put in the time. And technology is wonderful, but email does not replace the human contact of a voice conversation, or better, a video conversation. So that's how we were able to get everyone to work together, was one relationship at a time.
I have an extra question here. You have brought a lot these characteristics of leaders, the necessity of being open, listening, caring, being able to build collaboration and relationships to gain trust. What else would you say that are the key characteristics of leaders? We're speaking here to future leaders.
Yes. I think another really important characteristic is to be willing to and able to shoulder the responsibility of making the decision. It's very important to be collaborative and hear all voices and take lots of advice from people, especially advice from people who disagree with you, because it's really important to hear those different perspectives. But at the end of the day, when you're the leader, you have to make the decision and you have to live with that decision. Sometimes leaders can feel it's safer to let their subordinates make small decisions that kind of snowball into a big decision, and that leader never actually has their decision-making moment. But there needs to be a clear sense to your team that this decision has been made with everyone's input considered, and that you're going to stand by your decision. So I think that takes a lot of courage and a lot of integrity, but it's also what makes your team trust you, and it will make your citizens trust you, that you're not afraid to make hard decisions and that you will stand by them. And I would say one last quality that is really important in leaders, and may sound silly, is a sense of humor, because it is hard. It is hard to be a leader. It is hard to be in charge. And if you want to ensure that you don't go crazy with the responsibility, you have to remember that you're in it for the purpose of service, to help people. And one of the best ways to help people is just by being friendly and making them smile. And it doesn't mean making jokes, it just means being able to have a sense of humor about how absurd life can be sometimes. So I think that's a survival tactic for leaders, and maybe for everyone. It's just to have a sense of humor.
Yes, we're familiar with that in Brazil. Okay, we're arriving at the end of our conversation. Maybe could you give a final advice, a final message you would like to pass on to our future mayors?
Absolutely. I think you're about to embark on one of the best jobs in government. And I have so much respect for people who are willing to step up and take those leadership roles on in cities across the world. I think one of the things that will make you successful is to remember the words that I finished my presentation with, that change management, it's not complicated, but it's hard. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes listening, it takes all of those things. And there's no substitute for putting in the time with people. You can delegate responsibilities and should delegate responsibilities where possible, but whenever you are able to have a face-to-face interaction with someone in your community, it will make a difference to them. It will earn their trust, and it will help you be effective in whatever policy changes you're trying to implement. because if you have the support of the community, then you have all the power you need.
Great, thank you. It
Thank you
was
so much.
great to end on an inspirational note.
I feel so grateful for the opportunity to speak today, and I wish everyone the best of luck.
Thank you, Alexis. It was great to have you with us.